Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. It's good to have you listening along. I'm Gary Shorman, and the program is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management. Our guest today is Jim Bonham, and Jim heads up, President CEO of the ESOP Association, based out of Washington, D.C. Some exciting things coming up there, but Jim, welcome to our program.
Thanks, Gary. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know what? One of the things that we all know, and the program talks about challenging times, but for many companies, this is a challenging time of transition. We talk a lot about how people are transitioning and moving. For the listeners out there, the viewers out there that don't understand what employee ownership is about, can you talk just a little bit about the overview of employee ownership?
Sure. It's interesting when most people hear the term ESOP, they think of fairy tales like Aesop's fables. But ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, and they were created by Congress almost 50 years ago right now. In fact, they were created as part of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, or ERISA, that was signed into law on Labor Day in 1974, so almost 50 years ago. And the idea is that when a business owner, an entrepreneur who has created a business and grown it over time, when it comes time for them to retire or transition out of their business, and maybe they don't have a family member that wants to take over the business, or they don't want to sell to a competitor, or they don't want to sell to like private equity, they can transition their business so that their employees become the owners. And the way it works is there's a trust is created, and the trust will borrow money that usually the company will provide a loan to the ESOP, and the company may go take a loan from a bank or some other finance mechanism. And over time, the ESOP buys the company from the original owner, and then it must operate under ERISA for the benefit of the employees. And the employees become employee owners through a system that's described when the trust is originally set up. So most ESOPs, you must become eligible to be a plan participant within 6 years. And a lot of ESOPs now, you become vested in the plan on day one when you walk in the company. But they have proven to be a hugely beneficial way to own a business, not just for the employee owners, who tend to have twice the wealth of a typical American household, but they've been hugely beneficial for the communities where these businesses reside, and they're just a terrific way to run a company because they're more profitable. Their employees have higher job satisfaction. You have higher employee engagement. They're more productive, and they tend to create and keep jobs where other businesses don't.
Jim, you did a good job there. So good you answered the next three of my questions right there. But I do have, as we look at employee ownership just in general, there has to be a buyer, which the employees, and a seller. How do the founders get there? Now, as a full disclosure, Eagle was one of those companies where the founder of our company, Bob Schmidt, looked at several different things, decided employee ownership was the right way to go, and transitioned. This was 25 years ago, 26 years ago now. Time flies. As the company then grew and prospered and did other things. When you see founders and you talk to founders, those people that are wanting to retire, what do you tell them about employee ownership that makes them say, hey, I want to take a deeper dive into this so I know more?
Universally, when I talk to the founders who have created an ESOP, I have yet to find somebody who says it was not the single best decision that they made when they left their company. And there are hundreds of examples where a business owner will go down a pathway of selling to a competitor or selling to private equity in particular, and they get close to the closing table and they realize, well, they're going to try to jam me down on the final sales price, or they're going to put these additional conditions on us, or they're not going to protect my employees the way that they had been promising they were going to protect my employees. And what usually happens is these business owners, they look at where they are. They may not have a family member who's interested in continuing the business. Or they may just want a liquidity event. It's like, listen, this has been great. It's time for me to move on. I want to go start a different business and I want to sell this one, but I want to be responsible to all of those employees who have gotten me where I am and been so important to the growth and the establishment of this business. So usually for a business owner that is looking at an ESOP, they are genuinely looking for a way to bring their employees into that wealth creation, into the ability to own a stake in your job. And it's really, it's gratifying to see it when it happens. And usually the way that it works is a business owner will start thinking about their transition, or they'll start thinking about their retirement, and they'll begin exploring different options. And they'll often talk to their family attorney or their longtime CPA, and they'll say, well, I've heard about this employee ownership thing, this ESOP idea. Can you go and investigate it for me? They'll do a feasibility study. Is it something that makes sense for the type of business that we have? And there are a lot of different factors that we could talk about that would go into a feasibility study. But at some point, they sort of decide, all right, is this something that we want to do? And what's great about an ESOP is that it has huge flexibility for the selling owner, because they don't have to sell the whole business all at once. They could sell, 5%, 10%. Usually the first is at least 30%, because there are significant tax benefits both to the company and to the selling business owner when you reach that 30% threshold. And then they can continue to sell increments up until they sell 100% of the business to the ESOP. So it's a very, very flexible way of selling your business as well.
So Jim, how does the ESOP Association fit in?
Well, the ESOP Association is the only comprehensive national trade association that represents ESOP companies and all of the professionals who provide services to them. So think the lawyers, the accountants, the professional fiduciaries, the business consultants who focus on culture and communications, and then, of course, the businesses themselves. And as a national trade association, we provide a whole range of services and benefits to our members. So we are the leading advocacy organization nationwide that seek to protect existing ESOPs and the laws and regulations that have been developed over the last 50 years. And we also are the leading advocate for the creation of more employee-owned businesses. In fact, just last week, I was at the White House, where they held the very first convening on employee ownership in history. And the administration brought together government officials and interested stakeholders to talk about what can be done to encourage more employee ownership in the U.S. economy. So we do a great deal in advocacy, but we also conduct a huge amount of education and educational programs throughout the country. We have 19 state or regional chapters throughout the country. Each of those chapters will hold conferences and events where we will provide general sessions on larger topics, and then we have breakout sessions on different subtopics about employee ownership and how to run an employee-owned business, and employee engagement and culture and communications, as well as the sort of ESOP 101s to help those business owners who are just starting to learn about forming an ESOP come up to speed without having to pay their attorney or their accountant for that educational process.
Jim, I've been a part of the ESOP Association and worked with you on many occasions. And what I find is that you always learn something new when you go to all of those different sessions. And I know there's one of those that is happening really right as we're speaking right now, and that we're a part of. that is making the ESOP Association something that is more of an international, not just a national association, because it's taking place over in London and Oxford, talking about what's going on at employee ownership on a national level. And you learn something everywhere you go. And I think you're in that same role. You get to be around other people on how important employee ownership can be, not only to a company, but to the communities they serve.
It can, and what you're talking about is the annual Oxford Symposium on Employee Ownership, and we're now in the third year of being the primary sponsor of this symposium. We actually sponsor it through our affiliated 501c3, the Employee Ownership Foundation, and what the symposium is about is the only international convening of stakeholders and practitioners and government officials globally to try to identify obstacles to employee ownership, to nurture new forms of employee ownership, and to encourage countries that don't have it as a model for owning a business to adopt policies that will allow employees to collectively own their businesses. So this year, we will have close to 120 representatives or delegates. I believe we're going to have 27 nations represented, including a delegation from the United States that includes an official delegation from the United States Congress and Senate. And you'll see other delegations of similar caliber from other countries. Will be addressed by a senator from Canada, a member of the House of Lords from the UK. We will have ministers from Slovenia and other countries that will talk about how their countries are approaching employee ownership, because we really are sort of in a moment right now where most nations are grappling with the challenges of wealth and income inequality. That this separation of the one percenters from the rest of the economy is not unique just to the United States. It is a phenomenon that's happening around the world, and it is one of the leading reasons why there is such almost a crisis in confidence that individuals can do better, or their kids can do better than they did. A lot of people don't feel like they continue to be on an upward economic trajectory. And we all see employee ownership as a real solution to some of those inequalities, and in a way that is respectful of a capitalist economic system, because nobody's talking about redistribution of wealth. This is genuinely finding a way that individual employees who would otherwise never have the means to purchase a company, creating a mechanism where they can finance the acquisition of the business where they work, and then benefit not just through their salary and wages and retirement plan, but also through the growth in equity and the growth in the value of the company. Often I often equate it to being a homeowner versus a renter. Most people in our economy have become renters. When it comes to their jobs, they are being paid a salary or wages, and they are renting their time to the business owner. But at an ESOP, yes, you are being paid your salary and wages, and often they are above the market rate for a regular business, but you also have ownership in the business. So it's like owning equity in your house. We all know when the value of your house goes up, you're gaining equity and long-term financial security. So it's just a really terrific model. And what we're doing at Oxford is helping to identify ways to make it grow and prosper throughout the world.
Jim, I've heard you speak on the silver tsunami. I want to take a break. We'll come back and talk about what that means, mainly in our areas of the U.S. where this silver tsunami is taking place. Stay tuned. We'll talk more about that. Our guest is Jim Bonham, President and CEO of the ESOP Association. Back with more after this.
Since 1776, the United States of America continues to stand tall. It's been tested before, many times. Through grit and the ability to move forward, we create better tomorrows. We help our clients live their best lives to and through retirement. We make it easier. Thank you, Kansas. Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, with our guest Jim Bonham, who is the CEO and president of the ESOP Association. Jim, you've talked about the silver tsunami. I've heard you talk about this several times. That's something real, but explain what that is.
So the silver tsunami is the phrase that we've come up with to describe what our economy is going to experience over the next 10 years or so, with baby boomers who own their businesses but are going to be retiring. And over the next 10 years, there's roughly 2.5 million privately owned businesses with a baby boomer who owns that business that needs to transition out. It will be the single largest transfer of wealth producing assets in the history of the world. And this is happening in the next 10 years. It's also one of the biggest unspoken economic crises that is likely to hit the United States in a lifetime. And so as boomers are retiring from their business and transitioning out, from an employee ownership perspective, we see this as a massive opportunity to encourage those business owners to sell to their own employees through an ESOP. Because right now, about of those 2.5 million business owners, only about less than 70% don't have any current transition plan. Meaning they don't have a family member to turn the business over to. They don't know if they're going to sell it to a competitor. They don't know if they want to sell it to private equity. Sadly, a lot of them will just close their doors. And those are lost jobs, lost economic opportunity for our local communities and the nation. And interestingly, with the silver tsunami and all of these retiring business owners, it's actually starting to raise some national security concerns, because what you're talking about are, the businesses that are in, the industrial Midwest, that are car parts manufacturers or small manufacturers, or they may provide some services to the Department of Defense and the supply chain. And what we're seeing is that some of our foreign competitors, China in particular, see that we have all of these retiring business owners, and they are strategically coming into the U.S., buying these businesses, stripping the intellectual property from them, stripping the talent from them, and then shutting them down, or just transferring the production from the U.S. to their facilities in China, and then importing the goods that we used to produce here in the U.S. So this is raising alarm bells with the White House and in the Congress, because this job transference, this business transference, this what they call direct foreign investment from our competitors, is a real challenge that we need to address. That's sort of a subset of the silver tsunami, but it's something that's very real. And we see employee ownership and ESOPs as a real solution to that.
Some people may have watched a 60 Minutes program a while back that talked about employee ownerships, and it really talked about the value of employee ownership. But there are different ways to go about doing it. And the ESOP Association is unique in the way they promote and build using the ERISA rules to build that. Explain the difference. Employee ownership is great. Having employees a part of the business, being a part of it, I describe it as, part of the family farm. Everybody works together for the purpose of building and continuing to survive and grow in the future. You got to work together. What is the difference between that and maybe some of the other models out there?
That's a good question. And there are several different models for what people are calling employee ownership. And it's one of the things that we wrestle with this at our Oxford Symposium, because it's almost like there's a continuum. And on one end of the spectrum, there are ESOPs, which are truly an employee-owned business, where as the company grows and the value of each individual share grows, those employees, the equity that they own, increases as well. Not only the longer they're with the company, they get more shares, but the shares they already own are also growing in value. And that's sort of one end of the spectrum. And then there's all the way on the other end of the spectrum, things that people would like to call employee ownership, but it's really more along the lines of profit sharing or sort of a short-term incentive, as opposed to what I would consider true employee ownership, where the idea of the business is that it is put into ownership by the employees so that multiple generations of employees over a long period of time are the beneficiaries of the wealth that that business is creating. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of ERISA, and that means that we're going to have what we would call our golden ESOPs, businesses that have been employee owned for 50 years or more. And when you think of that, that's 3, 4, 5 generations of employees. That it's like 5 generations of a family that have gone through a family-owned business. And if you've ever had exposure to a family-owned business, you understand that those families that own the small businesses or even the medium-sized businesses, they protect that business because it's the golden goose. And the idea is that you want to continue to grow it and nurture it and run it in a way that there's longevity to it. And that's how we see ESOPs. Now, there are also other new forms of employee ownership that are emerging, especially on the world stage, called like employee ownership trusts. And they are similar to an ESOP, but they don't all have the same level of ownership stake for the employees. So, for example, if an employee who is a vested employee at an ESOP were to retire, or if they were to leave, say they have to move to another part of the country, maybe their spouse gets transferred and they have to depart, that employee must be paid out. Their interest in the ESOP has to be paid to them. And that's because it is part of a qualified retirement plan under ERISA. With an employee ownership trust, often, depending upon the type of trust, that underlying ownership isn't there. So the employee doesn't actually own any shares or own any interest in any shares. But what they're doing is the trust must give them annual dividends or an annual profit sharing, so that the employee is, in fact, getting a higher degree of benefit, but it's really coming more in the form of additional compensation rather than in the form of an ownership stake in the underlying business. And then there are other things that are happening. It's gratifying. You referenced the 60 Minutes program, and 60 Minutes did a bit of a dive into a new model that some private equity firms are exploring, because it turns out that it has become recognized that employee-owned firms produce higher rates of return, they're more efficient, have higher job satisfaction, have better employee engagement, and all of that results in more profitability in a shorter period of time. And that has become very attractive to private equity investors. So they are starting to do a model where they will, when a company is purchased by a big private equity firm, at the point of purchase, they will set aside a small portion of the stock and they will grant that to the employees, let them know that, all right, if we ever sell this company, that's yours and you will benefit from the sale of the company as well. And what it's designed to do is to accelerate the hold period that private equity has for these companies that they buy. Typically, a private equity firm wants to purchase, modify, create efficiencies, and then sell a business within 7 years. And the idea is by introducing some form of ownership or shared equity, even if it's just a small portion of it, that the employees will be more motivated to accelerate that rate of return. So my view is that it's about time that private equity realize that they should be sharing some of their profits with their employees. But I'm not sure I would really call that true employee ownership, because it's really more accelerated profit taking as opposed to a long-term ownership arrangement.
Well, Jim, I know you have many times to talk to employee-owned companies, owners, trustees, et cetera, about this. If somebody is listening to this program, they may be one of the silver tsunami out there going, how and over the next 5 years am I going to transition my company? Where do I go? How do they hook up with the ESOP Association to get some answers for that? Again, I don't think there's any obligation to do it, but how do you figure out how to get those answers you want so you can make the right choice?
Well, the first thing is go to esopassociation.org. You can find a wealth of information there. You can also go to our foundation, employeeownershipfoundation.org, where there's about 20 different documents that will walk you through the basics of employee ownership and ESOPs and what you would do to create an employee stock ownership plan. But I would encourage anybody who's interested in at least exploring the formation of an ESOP is to go to a conference or an event. Because what you'll find there will be the opportunity to engage with some of the professionals who've been doing this for a very long time. You really want to have qualified, experienced advisors. And then it also gives you the opportunity to connect up with leaders of other ESOPs who've already been through it. The ESOP community is an incredibly warm, welcoming group of businesses. And what's terrific about them is that they just want others to succeed. So it's very easy to get good information. The one thing I would caution against, though, is, and we see this happen over and over and over, is that a business owner who is intrigued with the idea of an ESOP will turn to their longtime family lawyer or their longtime CPA, and they'll say, hey, what do you know about ESOPs? And more often than not, in fact, it would be sort of the rare instance that one of those long-term advisors would have any depth of experience with forming an ESOP company. So they're going to give it sort of a generic, more generalized response of, well, they can be complicated and expensive. I don't know a lot about them, but I haven't heard the best experience about them. And then the business owner gets turned off. And it's just a very superficial analysis. I really would encourage a business owner to push past that and learn for themselves what employee ownership is about. And what they'll discover is that you can sell your business for just as much, if not more, than you otherwise might have received. And it's really no more of a complicated transaction than any other business transaction you've been through. It's certainly manageable by a typical person who is capable of running a business.
So the ESOPassociation.org, you can go there. Will that tell you where the next regional meetings are? Because they're all over
you
the
can
country.
look up. Yeah, you can look up events that are located all around the country. There are big national events that we hold in Washington, D.C. And in Las Vegas every November. And we hold as many as about 150 events per year all around the country where you can go and attend sessions on everything from the basics of forming an ESOP to some of the more complicated managing your long-term fiduciary and repurchase obligations.
Jim, thanks for joining us, taking time. I know you're prepping to do several things. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, and appreciate the work you're doing with the ESOP Association.
Well, thank you, Gary, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and your listeners.
Hey, our guest
Thanks
today
for
has
having
been Jim Bonham, President and CEO of the ESOP Association. Thanks for listening. And thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of our program, Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. It's brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.